Section 119 is about reforming cash bail. Right now, at this very moment, we have hundreds of thousands of Americans who are incarcerated, not because they've been convicted of a crime, but because they're waiting for a day in court, because they've been arrested and they can't pay their bail. And so this section is really driven by the philosophy that no one should be held in jail because they can't afford to pay bail. And Brian Stevenson, he's the author of Just Mercy, and he said the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And so as we lean into our constitutional duty to establish justice, we have to look at reforming cash bail. There are far too many, like the whole war on drugs and the no-knock warrants and everything. This is an issue that disproportionately affects poor communities of color, and can have devastating consequences. Caleb Browder, we'll talk more about when we get to the sections reforming solitary confinement. He was a teenage boy who spent years in Rikers Island in New York because his family couldn't pay his cash bail. And he ended up spending years in solitary confinement because his family couldn't afford to bail him out of jail. And it destroyed his mental health in such a way that he ultimately committed suicide within a few years over cash bail. Cash bail is destroying lives, and it is not justice. We can do better by reforming it. So this section 119 has two subsections. First would end cash bail on the federal level. Says simply, notwithstanding any provision of federal law, no justice, judge, or any other judicial official in any court created by or under Article 3 of the Constitution of the United States may use payment of money as a condition of pretrial release in any criminal case. Now, if someone is a danger to society, then judges will, as always, have the authority and the ability to hold someone. But demanding money in order to release someone, bail is not punishment. Bail is there to ensure someone's return to court. And we have many other ways in the 21st century to ensure that people do that, through supervised release, through just reminding people by text messages, by phone calls, by email about what's going on when they're with their court. There are far better ways to make sure that people come back besides demanding money. I guess we should talk about what are the reasons why we have this system in place. And it's important to recognize that the United States is one of only two countries on the planet that allows a for-profit cash bail industry. The Philippines is the other one. And it's a big business. California a few years ago looked at a proposition that would have ended the practice of cash bail, and the bail bond industry mobilized to stir up fear and get people to vote against it. And fear and getting tough on crime. I know this is an easy thing for politicians to lean into. Remember, during my years in the legislature, we debated a bill one time that when someone was going to be released, when their sentence was complete, and they would be freed, bill instead put them on supervised release for, I forget, 3 or 6 months ahead of time, because otherwise, once someone's sentence is done, then that's it. It's done and it's over. And by putting someone on supervised release, you have the opportunity to help them reacclimate to the community. And that's that's the goal of incarceration, is to reform humankind, not exterminate it. But some people got all upset by this idea of letting criminals out 90 days or 6 months before the last possible day they could be released. They were more concerned about the punishment than the end result. And so we have that same objection to cash bail today. Well, if you let people out of jail, some of them will do bad things. And again, in a country of 330 million people, that is a non-zero number. But we have to look at the harm that is being caused by the practice of cash bail today. Like, if you're suddenly, your life is interrupted and you're locked up, what happens? It's very easy to lose your job, to lose your apartment. You could lose custody of your children. All these things that are destabling people's lives, to the extent that crime is someone acting outside of societal norms. You want to help that person have a stable life in order to better act within those societal norms. Sandra Bland was pulled over in Texas a few years ago for allegedly failure to use a turn signal. And her traffic stop escalated and she was thrown in jail. And unable to pay her bail, she lost the new job that she was supposed to start on Monday and was found dead in her jail cell after a few days. Cash bail is not justice, and no one should be held just because they can't afford to pay. The second part of this section puts restrictions on states. Once again, restrict funds under the Byrne Grant Program beginning in the 2025 fiscal year, unless the state did two things. One, the state has to submit to the Attorney General the percentage of criminal cases where payment of money was a condition of pretrial release during the 12 months ending June 30th of that year. And two, achieve a percentage below a threshold for the year. So for the fiscal year 2025, 75%, that only 25% of criminal cases, a maximum of 75% could utilize cash bail. In 2026, that would fall to 50%. In 2027, it would fall to 25%. And for the fiscal year 2028 and beyond, only 10%. And so it would set lower targets each year for incentivized states to use cash bail less and less. And we look at why do we use cash bail? And one of the biggest reasons is that it encourages self-service convictions. We lock people up and tell them they're too dangerous. They can't possibly be released unless they take a plea bargain, unless they plead guilty to something. And then very frequently, they can be let go with time served. Once they pleaded guilty to something, then they may no longer be a threat. There was a 2017 study of Harris County in Texas, the third largest county in the United States. And it found that people who were held on cash bail were 25% and unable to get out, were 25% more likely to plead guilty. They were 43% more likely to be sentenced to jail. Now, when you have that sort of disparity, it's very clear that justice is not being done. You can imagine if you're trying to defend yourself, if you've been accused of something, how much of a defense can you put on while you're incarcerated? You can't talk to witnesses. You can't collect evidence. If you can't afford cash bail, you probably can't afford a good lawyer. And so you hope that there's a public defender out there who will zealously do all these things while you're locked up. In too many cases, this is just the criminalizing of being poor. You see cases like Kyle Rittenhouse, a boy who was charged as an adult and given $2 million bail. Now he was able to crowdsource that money to get out of jail and put on a defense. But when judges offer, set bail on millions and millions of dollars for people, that's not, they're handing down punishment prior to a conviction, just being capricious to assign someone a public defender and tell them you can get out if you can put up $5 million. That is not justice. Of course, this section of the bill doesn't occur in a vacuum. This legislative package will end poverty with universal basic income. And poverty, of course, is a driver of crime. Cash bail and self-service convictions are essential to trying to deal with in the judicial system because it is just so overloaded. And so by reducing crime through ending poverty, we can better establish justice. So some states have already restricted the use of cash bail. New York did this recently in 2019, I believe, and their numbers found that 80% of the people released under the new guidelines were not rearrested. 20% were rearrested for a criminal act, a misdemeanor or something, and just 2% of those who have been released on these new guidelines were rearrested for violent crimes. Again, it's not a non-zero number, but the harm that's being done doesn't come in a vacuum. And the idea that 4 out of 5 people who would not go on to be rearrested should be held in jail just in case. You have to look at the harm that's being done. Like, I'm going to say, won't somebody think of the children? Like, we know we want children to grow up to be, mentally healthy, stable members of society, and having parents around is one of the best ways, one of the contributing factors to that. And when you lock up parents and you break up families and you see children get bounced around to a relative's house, maybe ending up in foster care, we're destabilizing their lives. And this causes far more harm short term and in the long term. And so ending cash bail, reforming cash bail is an essential part of establishing justice. Chair, I think that concludes my testimony for Section 119. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, you had mentioned that some folks or in California, there was fear stirred up about the streets being unsafe, but I think others may also feel that same way. Can you address or talk more about why they would have felt that this would make people feel that it would make the streets less safe?
That's a great question. And I guess I want to say people feel what the media tells them to feel, right? This is where you get the idea, if it bleeds, it leads. Local news, so much of news is focused on crime and making people feel unsafe. They have studies that say that, people who believe that crime, nationwide is up, yet they don't feel it. They don't feel unsafe in their own neighborhoods. It's a perception. And so the numbers back this up, that cash bail reform does not make the streets unsafe. What the media chooses to report, you can always cherry pick stories, but I would love to see more stories about the families that were reunited because of cash bail reform. I'd love to see more stories about the people who were able to prove their innocence rather than taking a plea bargain because of cash bail reform. I would like to see more stories about the parents who were able to read to their children at night because of cash bail reform. There's a non-zero chance that someone will be released and go on to commit another crime. But in the vast majority of cases, as the studies show, that doesn't happen. And so cash bail needs to be reformed.